The massive oak door slammed shut with a thunderous bang that rattled the crystal chandelier overhead. Cordelia Whitmore pressed her back against the carved wood, her chest heaving as she watched the third group of potential suitors storm down her front steps in fury. Through the lace curtains, she could see them mounting their horses with wounded pride, spitting curses about her impossible standards and frigid heart. "Ma'am," her housekeeper's voice trembled from the hallway. There's more men." At the gate, Cordelia's emerald eyes flashed with exasperation. Ever since word spread through Cedar Ridge that the railroad fortune widow was considering remarriage, her doorstep had become a parade of fortune hunters, aging bachelors, and smooth-talking charlatans, each one left more bitter than the last. When she saw through their transparent schemes, she smoothed her black silk dress and lifted her chin. "Send them away, Ophelia. I'm done entertaining pretenders today." But Ophelia wrung her hands nervously. "These ones are ... different, ma'am. They're mighty big fellows, and they're not demanding entrance. They're just ... waiting. Been standing there respectful like for near an hour." Curiosity overrode Cordelia's irritation. She moved to the window and parted the curtains wider. Her breath caught in her throat. Two men stood at her wrought-iron gate, and they were indeed giant Sicily, 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that could span a doorway. One had hair the color of autumn wheat, the other dark as a moonless night. Their clothes were simple, but clean, worn leather chaps, cotton shirts, and boots that had seen honest work. What struck her most was their posture. Unlike the others who had strutted up her walkway with entitled swagger, these men stood with their hats in their hands, heads slightly bowed in genuine deference. The fair-haired one looked up as if sensing her gaze. Even from a distance, she could see the startling blue of his eyes, not the calculating gleam she'd grown accustomed to, but something deeper. Sadness, perhaps, or resignation. Against her better judgment, Cordelia found herself walking to the front door and opening it. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her wraparound porch as she stepped outside, her heels clicking on the painted boards. "Gentlemen," she called out, her voice carrying the authority that came with owning half the county, "state your business." The two men exchanged glances before the dark-haired one stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're Bronte and Caspian Mercier. We heard tell you might be looking for ... companionship." Cordelia's mouth tightened. "If you're here for my money..." "No, ma'am," Bronto interrupted, his voice deep and honest. "We know you've turned away plenty of men already. We don't blame you none. Most folks look at what you have instead of who you are." The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. For months, she'd endured men who saw only her fortune, her estate, her potential usefulness to their own ambitions. No one had acknowledged her as a person in so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like. "Then what do you want?" she asked, her voice softer despite herself. Caspian's blue eyes met hers across the distance. "Just a chance to show you we're different, ma'am. Please don't turn us away like the others." The words hung in the evening air like a prayer. Cordelia studied the two men carefully, searching for the telltale signs of deception she'd learned to recognize. But their faces held only quiet dignity and something that looked dangerously like hope. "You're cowboys," she observed, noting the telltale signs of men who lived their lives on horseback. "Yes, ma'am," Bronte confirmed. "We work the Rockingham Ranch about 20 miles north. Been there nigh on 8 years now." "Then why aren't you there now?" "It's nearly supper time." The brothers four, she could see the family resemblance now in their strong jawlines and noble bearings. Another look. Caspian cleared his throat. "We saved up our wages for 3 months to buy decent clothes and a hotel room in town. Figured we'd need a few days to work up the courage to come calling." His honesty was disarming. "Truth is, ma'am, we've been watching you from afar for quite some time." Cordelia's hand tightened on the porch railing. "Watching me?" "Not in a bad way," Bronte rushed to explain, color rising in his weathered cheeks. "It's just, you come to town every Thursday for supplies. You always speak kindly to old Pete at the general store, and you gave Mrs. Henderson money for her sick baby without her even asking. We've seen how you treat folks who can't do nothing for you in return." The observation surprised her. She'd thought her charitable acts had gone unnoticed. Most people in Cedar Ridge saw only the wealthy widow. In her fine carriages and expensive dresses, so you think kindness makes me a suitable wife? The question came out sharper than she intended, but months of dealing with opportunists had left her defenses permanently raised. No, ma'am, Caspian said quietly. I think it makes you worthy of being truly loved. The words hit her like lightning. Cordelia's breath caught, and for a moment she couldn't speak. Behind her, she heard Ophelia gasp softly from the doorway where she'd been eavesdropping. You don't know me, Cordelia managed finally. We'd like to, Brontë said simply, if you'll let us. The setting sun painted everything golden, and in that light, the two men looked like something from a storybook noble knights come to court a princess. But Cordelia had learned the hard way that fairy tales were dangerous things. I'm not some lonely spinster desperate for male attention, she said, lifting her chin. I have land, money, and everything I need to live comfortably without a husband. Ma'am, we know, Caspian agreed. That's what makes you so remarkable. You don't need anybody, but maybe you might want somebody anyway. The distinction was crucial, and it showed an understanding that none of her previous suitors had possessed. Want versus need. Choice versus desperation. Cordelia found herself walking down the porch steps before she realized what she was doing. The evening breeze caught her skirts and sent dark curls escaping from her carefully arranged chignon.
What exactly are you proposing?
She asked when she reached the gate. Up close, they were even more impressive. Both men towered over her petite frame, but somehow their size felt protective rather than intimidating. Brontë smelled of leather and honest sweat, while Caspian carried the scent of hay and wild horses. Courtship, Brontë said solemnly. The old-fashioned kind, where a man earns a woman's affections through his actions, not his bank account. Both of you. The question escaped before she could stop it. The brothers looked at each other. Something passed between them understanding. Born of years of shared struggle and unbreakable loyalty, we've never been apart, Caspian explained. Came into this world together, been together through everything since. If that's not something you could abide, we'd understand, Brontë. Finished, but we can't change who we are. Cordelia stared at them, her mind reeling. In all her years of marriage to elderly Mortimer Whitmore, and in all the months since his death, no one had ever spoken to her with such raw honesty. The idea of courting two men simultaneously should have shocked her, but instead she found herself intrigued by their unwavering bond. This is highly unconventional, she said carefully. Yes, ma'am, it is, Caspian acknowledged. But then again, so is a woman owning half a county and running it better than most men ever could. The compliment was delivered without flattery, simply a stated fact. Cordelia felt warmth spread through her chest, a sensation she'd almost forgotten existed. You know about my business dealings? It's hard not to. Brontë grinned, and the expression transformed his serious face entirely. You've got every banker from here to Denver scrambling to keep up with your investments. Word is, you've doubled the Whitmore fortune since old Mortimer passed. Cordelia couldn't help but smile back. Most men were either intimidated by her financial acumen or dismissive of it. These two seemed genuinely impressed. I suppose you'll want me to give up my interests if we were to... She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Why would we want that? Caspian looked genuinely puzzled. You're brilliant at what you do. Be a damn shame to waste a mind like that on nothing but household management. The casual profanity should have offended her ladylike sensibilities, but instead it made her laugh. When had she last laughed with genuine joy? She couldn't remember. My late husband's family would be scandalized, she warned. A widow entertaining two suitors at once. The gossips will have a field day. Let them talk, Brontë said fiercely. Anyone who matters will see the truth soon enough. And what truth is that? That you deserve to be cherished, Caspian answered, without hesitation. Properly cherished, by people who see your worth. The word people didn't escape her notice. It's not a man or someone, but people, as if they already understood that. Love could take forms that society hadn't quite figured out yet. Cordelia made a decision that surprised even herself. She unlatched the gate. Would you like to come inside for dinner? Ophelia always cooks enough for an army, and I confess I'm curious to hear more about this. Courtship you're proposing. The brothers' faces lit up with identical expressions of joy and relief. They followed her up the stone pathway, and Cordelia couldn't help but notice how they unconsciously flanked her, not possessively but protectively, as if she were something precious that needed safeguarding inside. Ophelia bustled about, setting extra places at the dining room table, her eyes wide with fascination. The housekeeper had worked for the Whitmores for 20 years and had never seen her mistress look so animated over roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. Cordelia learned that the Mercier brothers had been orphaned young and raised by their grandmother. On a failing farm in Kansas, they'd worked their way west, taking whatever honest jobs they could find, always together. They'd saved every penny not spent on absolute necessities, dreaming of someday having enough to court a good woman properly. "And you think I'm that woman?" Cordelia asked, dabbing her lips with her napkin. "We hope you might be," Brontë answered honestly. "We've been watching you for 2 years, ma'am. It's not just your kindness, but your strength. It's the way you handled that trouble with the railway company, how you stood up to those carpetbaggers trying to buy out the small farmers. You fight for what's right, even when it costs you." "It's a rare thing," Caspian added softly, "finding someone with both compassion and courage." Cordelia felt tears prick her eyes. These men saw her in a way her own husband never had. Mortimer had valued her as an ornament, a symbol of his success. But the Mercier brothers spoke of her as if she were a force of nature, worth admiring. "What would people say?" she whispered. "Does it matter?" Brontë asked gently. "Do you spent your whole life caring what others think? Maybe it's time to care what you think." The question haunted Cordelia long after the brothers had reluctantly taken their leave, promising to return the next evening if she'd have them. But she lay in her silk-draped bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering when she'd become so afraid of her own desires. During her marriage to Mortimer, she'd been the perfect society, wife, beautiful, accomplished, and silent on all matters of importance. She'd hosted dinner parties and charity events, worn the right clothes, and said the right things. But she'd never felt truly alive until tonight, sparring verbally with 2 cowboys who treated her as an equal. The next morning brought a parade of visitors, all eager to share the shocking news that the Whitmore widow had entertained mail callers for dinner. Cordelia received them in her front parlor, serving tea and deflecting questions with practiced ease. "My dear Cordelia," twittered Prudence Ashford, the town's most notorious gossip, "surely you can't be serious about those ... men. They're nothing but hired hands." "They're honest workers," Cordelia replied calmly. "I find that preferable too. Men who've never done an honest day's labor in their lives?" The barb hit home, as Prudence's own son was notorious for living off his father's banking fortune while contributing nothing to society. "But the impropriety of it all," gasped Millicent. "Hartwell, 2 men at the same time? What would dear Mortimer say?" "Mortimer is dead," Cordelia said bluntly, causing several ladies to fan themselves in shock. "I'm very much alive, and I intend to start acting like it." After the gossiping hens finally departed, Cordelia threw herself into her business affairs. With renewed vigor, she reviewed contracts, negotiated with suppliers, and made decisions that would affect dozens of families throughout the county. For the first time in months, work felt like more than just a distraction from loneliness. That evening, Mercier brothers returned as promised, bringing wildflowers they'd picked along the roadside. The simple gesture touched her more than any expensive bouquet ever had. "We brought books to Caspian," said shyly, producing 2 worn volumes from his saddlebags. "Brontë heard you mention last night that you like poetry." Cordelia examined the book's collections of Wordsworth and Keats, their pages soft with handling. "These are yours." "Our grandmother taught us to read," Brontë explained, said ignorance was the worst kind of poverty. "We've been building our own library, bit by bit." The revelation that these rough cowboys were also intellectuals delighted her. They spent the evening on her front porch, reading aloud to each other as the sun set behind the mountains. Cordelia found herself mesmerized by the deep timbre of their voices, bringing life to familiar verses. "You read beautifully," she told Caspian, as he finished a particularly moving sonnet. "Had good teachers," he smiled, glancing meaningfully at his brother. "We taught each other everything we know." Their devotion to one another was evident in every interaction. They finished each other's sentences, shared private jokes, and moved with the unconscious synchronization of people who'd spent their entire lives together. Far from making Cordelia feel excluded, it made her want to be part of something so beautiful. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. The brothers would arrive after their work was done, still smelling of leather and horses, and spend their evenings courting her with old-fashioned persistence. They brought her small gift-smooth stones from the creek, pressed flowers, carved, wooden trinkets made during long nights around the campfire. They also brought her stories of the outside world she rarely saw anymore. Tales of cattle drives and wild storms, of helping neighbors in trouble, and the simple satisfaction of hard work well done. Their world was so different from her rarefied existence among Cedar Ridge's elite, and she found herself hungry for every detail. "You could come see the ranch," Brontu suggested one evening as they sat in her garden, "if you'd like. Meet the horses we work with." "I'd love that," Cordelia heard herself saying. Surprising them all, the next Sunday, she traded her usual silk dress for a simple cotton riding habit and accompanied them to the Rockingham. The ranch was exactly as she'd imagined, sprawling and honest, with none of the pretension that marked her own estate. Watching the brothers work was a revelation. They moved with fluid grace, their massive frames perfectly suited to handling the powerful animals under their care. They were completely in their element. Seeing them like this confident and skilled maid, Cordelia's pulse quickened in ways she'd forgotten were possible. The ranch owner, a weathered man named Augustus McKenna, greeted Cordelia with surprised respect when he learned her identity. Word of her business acumen had spread even to this remote corner of the territory. "These boys of mine speak of you often, Mrs. Whitmore," he said with a knowing smile. "Never seen them so devoted to anything except their horses before." "They're remarkable men," Cordelia replied honestly, watching Brontu gentle a skittish mare with infinite patience. "That they are," lost their parents. In a twister, when they were just boys. .1, they can try to make life difficult, Cordelia acknowledged. "But they have no legal standing. Mortimer left everything to me outright, not in trust. I'm free to do as I please." "And what pleases you?" Caspian asked softly. Cordelia looked at both men, these honest, devoted, beautiful souls who'd brought joy back into her life, and felt her heart swell with certainty. "You do," she said simply. "Both of you. I love you." The words hung in the air like a benediction. Both brothers went very still, as if afraid to breathe. "You love us, Brontus?" The voice was barely a whisper. Desperately, Cordelia confirmed, rising from her chair to move closer to them. "I love your kindness, your integrity, your devotion to each other. I love how you make me feel alive again. I love you both, and I don't care if the whole world thinks I'm mad for it." Caspian stood slowly, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "We love you too, Cordelia, from the first moment we saw you." "More than we ever thought possible," Brontu added, also rising. "You're everything we dreamed of and never dared hope for." They came together in the middle of her dining room, three people creating something entirely new, when Caspian cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with desperate tenderness. Cordelia felt the last walls around her heart crumble. When Brontu's arms encircled them both, she knew she'd found her home. "Marry us," Caspian whispered against her lips. "Both of us, if the law allows it. If not, then in every way that matters." "Yes," Cordelia breathed without hesitation. "Yes to everything." The legal ceremony would be complicated. Montana Territory had progressive laws, but marriage between one woman and two men was still unprecedented. However, they would find a way. Love this pure and true would not be denied by mere paperwork. That night, the first time since her girlhood, Cordelia fell asleep feeling completely cherished and safe. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with promise and possibility. 6 months later, Cordelia stood in her rose garden, wearing a cream silk dress and surrounded by the people who mattered most. The unconventional wedding had attracted supporters and detractors from across the territory. But she saw only the faces of those who loved her. Augustus McKenna served as witness alongside Ophelia, both beaming with joy for the unusual family they'd helped create. A progressive minister from Helena had agreed to perform a blessing ceremony. Though the legal paperwork would list Brontu as her husband, while Caspian would be recognized as her domestic partner, an arrangement that satisfied neither the law nor their hearts, but represented the best compromise available. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying across the assembled guests, "we gather today to witness something remarkable, the joining of three souls who have found in each other the missing pieces of themselves." Cordelia stood between the two men who'd transformed her world, her hands clasped together as the setting sun painted everything golden. Brontu wore his finest black suit, his wheat-colored hair neatly combed for once. Caspian looked magnificent, in deep blue that matched his eyes, his usual serious expression softened by unguarded happiness. "The love we celebrate today may be unconventional," the minister continued, "but it is no less sacred for being rare. These three have chosen to build their lives on mutual respect, unwavering devotion, and the courage to follow their hearts. Despite the judgment of others, the months leading up to the ceremony, their relationship had deepened and settled into comfortable rhythms. Mornings found them working together on the ranch, which Cordelia had purchased for them as a wedding gift. Evenings were spent reading aloud, discussing business ventures, or simply enjoying each other's company on the wide front porch of their new home. The gossips had eventually grown bored with the scandal, especially when it became clear that the unusual arrangement was producing nothing more shocking than contentment and prosperity. The ranch flourished under their combined management, and Cordelia's business ventures continued to thrive with input from her husband's practical wisdom. "Do you, Cordelia Whitmore, take these men as your beloved companions to honor and cherish for all the days of your life?" "I do," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the garden without a tremor of doubt. "And do you, Brontu and Caspian Mercier, pledge your lives and love to this remarkable woman who has chosen to trust you with her heart?" "We do," they answered in unison, their deep voices harmonizing perfectly. The minister smiled and raised his hands in blessing. "Then by the power vested in me by faith and love, I pronounce you a family, bound together by bonds stronger than law and more enduring than convention. You may kiss your bride." What followed was the most scandalous moment of the entire scandalous affair, both men kissing their wives simultaneously while the assembled crowd erupted in cheers, tears, and the occasional shocked gasp from the few remaining disapprovers. Later, as the last guests departed and the three settled into their shared sitting room, Cordelia reflected on the journey that had brought them together. From that first evening when two desperate cowboys had knelt before her gate, begging not to be turned away like all the others, to this moment of perfect contentment, it had been the wildest adventure of her previously ordered life. "Any regrets?" Brontu asked softly, pulling her against his side while Caspian stoked the fire. "Only that we waited so long to find each other," Cordelia replied honestly. "I spent 40 years being who others wanted me to be. I intend to spend the rest of my life being exactly who I am." Caspian asked, settling beside them with a contented sigh. "A woman who loves two extraordinary men," she answered without hesitation. "A woman who's finally learned that the heart makes its own rules. Happiness is worth any price society demands." Outside their windows, the Montana wind sang through the grass, carrying with it the promise of seasons yet to come. Three people who'd found their perfect match in each other planned their future with the confidence of those who know they're exactly where they belong. The town would talk, of course. Some would always disapprove. But in the warm circle of their shared love, Cordelia had found something more precious than respectability she'd found herself. And two men who cherished every complicated, passionate, brilliant facet of who she was. Ada, and for the first time in her life, that was more than enough, was everything.